So Noah Reid, we're talking to you today about your role as Patrick Brewer on Schitt's Creek. You come in midway through season 3, and then you become a series regular right the way through that wonderful happy ending. But take us back to that, to the casting of it. And I know from what Dan Levy said, all the scripts are written for a season before it starts. So when you go in to audition midway through season 3, you know the arc of the character right through the end of that season, right?
I did not know what the arc of the character would be. I sort of, I got my scene, my two scenes that I got to read, which were the first scenes of Patrick's character, where David comes into Ray's office to figure out his business idea and apply for the license, and without really knowing what he's doing. And I sort of didn't have much of a clue where it would go beyond then. I knew that there would be, the potential for something to, as a television performer and an audience member, that when a character gets introduced and there's, a sort of a spark like that, there's obviously the potential for something to sort of grow and blossom there. But I didn't know, how it would work throughout the rest of that season. I certainly didn't know, that it would continue into as many seasons as it did. I sort of was, I was aware of the show. I hadn't watched it, which was a source of much contention with Dan when I when I finally disclosed that. And I didn't actually end up watching the show until after we had finished shooting season 3, because I was quite nervous about, how it would make me think about myself on set with these characters. And I thought, well, Patrick doesn't know anybody, so it's probably best if I just, come in flying blind, and then I can experience all this stuff for the first time. But which was a risky move, I think. But yeah, I had no real idea where everything was going to go. And until, season 4 sort of rolled around, and then I sort of thought, okay, well, this is really turning into something here. So yeah, you never quite know. And I couldn't be more thrilled about how it all turned out.
So you're absolutely right. I mean, Patrick wouldn't know about the roses, so I think in a way it made sense that Noah shouldn't really know either. But what Noah does know is that there are these 2 comedy icons in the show, right? Catherine OHara and Eugene Levy. I mean, and Patrick has this great relationship with each of them, but what were those first scenes like with those 2, icons of Canadian comedy?
I mean, I was quite nervous to be stepping into that company, having, been so familiar with both of their work over the years, starting with SCTV and then to their incredible film careers. Such incredible, generous human beings. They really let you know, that you were welcome, that you were important. Both of them knew my name instantly, which is a pretty good indicator that they feel like you're worth it being there. And then, as soon as you're in character land, then you feel like you have some sense of, what you're doing, and who you are to each other. And particularly, I think with Moira, I think Patrick sort of views that there's like a lot of David in Moira and a lot of Moira in David. And that's a kind of a fun connection to make. And I think in a way he probably sees a lot of himself in Johnny, like this sort of, steady character, holding things together and dealing with all kinds of strange eccentricities and trying to just, get through it all. So I feel like there's a bit of an unspoken understanding there in a way. And certainly the first time I got to act with either one of them was a complete thrill. I remember that there was a scene, I think it was season 4, where Patrick goes to town hall to meet with Moira. And it was the only scene I think that I had one-on-one with Catherine. And at one point, David comes in and we're sort of having a chat and a laugh. And so we were supposed to just sort of come up with something off the cuff. And Catherine, in her incredible, playful way, just sort of like, was like, what do you want to do? What do you want to say? Just handed it over to me. I was like, no, you're the good one. You're the funny one. You do it. She was like, no, you. So, I got to spend the day, kicking around little scene starting improvs with Catherine O'Hara. And I'm afraid to say that I'm not sure I held up my end of the bargain very well, but they managed to cut it okay.
Well, one thing we sort of see Patrick, he's quite straight-laced and buttoned down, and then he does finally, there's that instant chemistry with David, but it's really in season 4 where it sort of blossoms and we start to see other sides of Patrick, and that all leads up to, open mic night. So, you're a musician as well. I mean, so how thrilled were you to be given that showcase, and how intimidated then when they come up with the song idea?
Yeah, well, I remember well reading the script for open mic and realizing that I was going to have to sing, and not just sing, I was going to have to come up with something pretty special. There was some weight on it in the writing of the script, and that presents an incredible opportunity, and what you do with that opportunity is sort of on your shoulders. And I spoke to Dan about it and at the read through and asked him, okay, so you're going to make me sing? And he said, yeah, and actually that song is very important to me. So don't fuck this up. I was like, oh, okay, all right. But it was a very supportive environment. They were like, if you want any help arranging this, go for it. And I was like, no, I think I'd like to take a crack at it myself. I knew that, it would be, I've always enjoyed of writing songs and arranging songs from the perspective of a character. I did that a lot when I was in theater school at the National Theater School in Montreal. And I kind of enjoy taking on a different character's perspective. So, getting to arrange that song and play through it, I was like, okay, well, how does Patrick interact with his instrument? In this case, a guitar. I'm more of a piano player. I do play a little bit of guitar, but I wouldn't say I'm the most comfortable on it, which in the case of Patrick, I thought, okay, well, that's probably actually fits, because Patrick's not a musician. He's a guy who plays some guitar and sings, but he doesn't make it his work. It's just a thing that he does, in a way that he can communicate in this one particular instance, something quite vulnerable and true and authentic and a little bit playful. So I wanted the arrangement to reflect the moment that it was between those two characters, and I think there's an element of Patrick that likes to push things forward a little bit and in a more direct way maybe than David, and yeah, that day was so special. I had learned from watching Catherine O'Hara and Dan do the number in the episode that they do the number, that Catherine was like, if you have a live performance to do, you should have them shoot the audience first if you can, because that way the audience gets to hear it for the first time. You get so much more genuine reactions, and the performer gets some time to work out the kinks. And we got there on the day, and our director, Bruce McCullough, had scheduled it the other way. I had driven up with him that morning, and I was like, can we flip that? Is there any way? And he was like, I don't know, that's going to be tough for lighting. And I said, well, Catherine said that that's how it should be done. And he was like, okay. And he did. He switched it around, and that was super beneficial, because I felt like I was able to sort of get into a bit of a rhythm. And by the end of it, it just felt like it was a really beautiful day that I'll remember forever. And it did feel like something special was happening there, which was incredible. You never know how that stuff's going to go over.
Oh, and I mean, it's taken a life of its own. It's sort of, I mean, I think really that's when the show in America kind of hit. Suddenly that was trending on social media. And I think what's so interesting is, as important as it was to Dan Levy, is he talks about the fact that they had to cut corners in other areas of the budget to clear the rights, to make sure that they got to use that song. So that's where you sort of really, Patrick ends up on our radar. And then the next season, the coming out episode, Meet the Parents. I mean, the emotional heart of the show so often centers on the relationship between David and Patrick. That episode and the scene in the diner with your parents. I mean, just if you could talk a little bit about that. It was so heart-wrenching, and you could see Patrick's physical and emotional discomfort.
Yeah, I mean, I like with everything in this show, it really starts with the writing and the character development. And, you know, I just feel like that storyline was crafted with such care. You know, it was clearly was going to be an important one for our fans, our viewership. And I felt that it had been taken care of so well in its writing stage that really the pieces were all there. I could feel when I read it, the emotional content of and the anxiety and the sort of the fear that would come with that kind of moment. I think, like with so many moments in this show, the emotional content and the comedy content are interwoven so beautifully. And this episode is no exception, but it certainly, you know, I think it spoke to a lot of people in that, you know, it was a really positive coming out story. And, you know, I received a ton of messages after that about how, you know, that episode and that storyline and how the Brewers were really more concerned that their son wouldn't feel comfortable coming to them than, you know, anything to do with his sexuality. But I felt, you know, I mean, I'm a straight guy. I have never had to come out to anybody. And I don't think that I had really considered that from you know, my own skin, my own perspective, until stepping into that scene where, you know, your parents are presumably, they're the people that know you the best. They're the people that love you the most. And yet when you have to describe to them that you may not be who they think you are, and there's an element of yourself that's so key to your identity that may change the way that they think about you, it really, I mean, I had never really considered, I think, from that in-depth perspective what that was. And so the writing, I feel like, really led to most of the emotional content of that scene.
And then I think just a couple of episodes later, the hike, again, the mixing of the comedy and the emotional when, you know, Patrick proposes. I mean, again, just another heart-wrenching moment. So I guess then that leads into season 6. Oh, and sorry, I want to give a shout out to the finale of season 5, the Cabaret. I mean, again, your background, music. I know you combined sort of music and theater when you did a rock version of Hamlet a couple of years ago. But how fun was that to get to do that iconic number from Cabaret?
Oh, it was so cool. I mean, I love performing in the theater. I've never considered myself much of a music theater performer. I feel like that's a totally different skill set than what I have, and you know, often it's sort of like, oh, you can do those two things, but I'm like, I cannot dance. And we did extensive dance rehearsals. It was so much fun. I mean, that number is so crazy, and the MC is such a wild character. It was so fun to sort of put that on for a moment, and all the costume and having everybody there on that one day. We really, I think the Willkommen scene was right at the end of the day. I think we only had about 3 chances to do it, so it did feel very theatrical. We were in this little theater in Toronto called Theater Passe Muraille, and it was packed with all of the rest of the characters and a bunch of background performers, and we had to deliver it, you know. So that felt really alive. Like a lot of the live performances, it felt really authentic and like it was happening in real time.
Well, I think that collectively you delivered in season 6. I mean, everything's set up, and then we know it's the final season, and, you know, it culminates in the wedding. But when were you still shooting season 6 when you found out about all the Emmy Awards nominations, or had you guys already wrapped?
We had just wrapped, and we were actually, a bunch of the cast were we were in Italy. We had gone sort of on a group trip together to sort of celebrate the end of the show. And I think particularly for Dan, it was like at the end of a real gauntlet stretch of, 6 or 7 years since the inception of the idea and shooting every season. And he really put everything, every moment of his life into creating this show and making it as good as it could be. And especially on the budget that the show had, making all of these elements work I can't imagine. So I think he was like, let's all just go to Italy and decompress. And while we were there decompressing, we found out that, we got 4 Emmy nominations. That was a very wild day. Everyone was out getting groceries or something, and Dan was alone in the house. Hilarious.
Yeah. But then, so when season 6 debuts, I mean, you've got the CBC in Canada, but Pop TV down in America, and boy, do they get behind it to the point that Patrick and David are on a billboard on Sunset Boulevard. I mean, that's sort of extraordinary. They're sort of the 2020 version of Ross and Rachel, and people are rooting for them. What was that like to see yourself, 10 stories high on Sunset Boulevard?
I mean, I get goosebumps thinking about it. It's, I mean, any of this stuff, the advertising around shows, you sort of think of it as part and parcel with being a part of any show. But there was something so unique and special about that particular ad campaign. And it was a very, conscious choice, I think, by Dan and the creative team, and to have Pop stand behind that messaging in that way was just so incredible and so meaningful for a large chunk of the community that's watching our show, and it's very I don't know, I was pretty speechless when we drove by. Dan and I and a few of the hair and makeup people that work on the show, Lucky and Anasaurus, we had just done this shoot for I think it was for Entertainment Weekly, and we were on our way to dinner, and we were like, let's drive by the thing. We got out and looked at it. It was incredible to see, and I think an incredible moving of the goalposts, moving things forward. I think a lot of the decision making on the show has been about making positive waves with the audience that we have, and the ability to make these decisions, the world that we live in now, and trying to open things up and say, we're going to lead by example, and this is going to be a positive thing,
Well, what I loved about the finale, I mean, it wraps up everything, and particularly the fact that Patrick is willing to move with Dan, to leave, and then it was Dan who realizes, his story isn't finished in Schitt's Creek. But I know you're sort of moved beyond it, and you're just about to release an album, and it's called Gemini, and we're an awards website. So I get that connection immediately, So you've named the album and used on the cover an image of the Canadian version of the Emmy, the old Canadian version of the Emmy called the Gemini, because the new version, the Canadian Screen Award, is something you won last year. So you've got to explain to me how that all came about.
Sure. Well, the Gemini, and I think I've really sort of come to embrace that in myself, that there are these sort of twin realities for me, and they're often combined. It's not really one or the other; it's both. And it seemed like a sort of an interesting nod to Canadian entertainment content, which obviously I'm quite engaged in. And the sort of the dual nature of my career, which is sort of acting and music happening at the same time. It was also a year that, the show had been to a lot of award shows, and I thought it would be a kind of an incredible, as a Gemini who never got to win or be nominated for a Gemini, was always sort of something I was like, oh man, I'll never have one of those. And I thought, wait a minute, if I'm in charge of making my own creative content, I might be able to make one. So we approached the Academy of Canadian Cinema and Television, and we got permission, and a good friend of mine, Miles Gertler, recast the Gemini and put his own unique spin on it. And I don't know, it just felt like a little tongue-in-cheek nod to this element of my world where these two things are colliding all the time.
Oh no, it's wonderful, and I know you've done a little bit of promotion for it. But so you've got a Gemini though in your house, right? Like,
yeah. I have the two. There's one on the front cover and one on the back cover, and they're both different. Of course, the original Gemini was gold plated, and these are recast in resin with all kinds of strange colors and things happening. So yeah, I keep them there and pretend like I've won them.
And I'm Canadian, you're Canadian. You're typically Canadian in that what you don't see is your Canadian Screen Award. And but listen,
I'm a little humble about that.
But listen, best of luck at the Emmy Awards, and maybe you've got a name for the next album there. So,
amazing.
Listen, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us.
It's my pleasure, Paul. Thank you very much.